Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Gareth Dyke, and we are presenting this webinar today on behalf of Lithosphere, on behalf of Geoscience World. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you. Why not put your name? Let us know where you're from in the chat box. Give us some information about yourself. That would be absolutely fantastic. My name's Gareth, and I'm joining today from Budapest in Hungary. I'm a geologist, a geoscientist, writing and publishing papers in paleontology for a number of years. What about you? Where are you from? What's your background? Do give us some information about yourself as we get started today and we begin our presentation in just a few moments. Don't be shy. At the end of this presentation, everybody joining us will get access to a recording of this event and also the slides and a certificate. Fantastic. Some colleagues from India. I can see some colleagues from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, from China, from Alberta, Canada. Absolutely fantastic. Welcome to this webinar event. Absolutely great. We'll just give it a few moments more for all of our colleagues to join us in the Zoom room. Today I see Algeria, I see Indonesia. Absolutely fantastic. We are going to be talking about Lithosphere, which is an open access journal published by Geoscience World. But more on that in a moment, because that's not all we're going to be talking about. Great to meet you. Fantastic to see you. Do not hesitate to put questions and comments as we go through this webinar event today into the chat box. We'll definitely have lots of time later on in our event to answer any of your questions, address any of your comments. You can use the chat box here in Zoom, or you can use the Q&A box as we learn more about you and where you're from. Brazil, Egypt, Argentina, more colleagues joining from India, more colleagues joining from China. Well done for staying up so late, colleagues from China. Let's get going. Let's talk a little bit over the next course of our training session today about lithosphere. Thank you for joining us. My name's Gareth. I'm a geologist, I'm a paleontologist. I've been writing and publishing papers in paleontology, sedimentology, and geology for a number of years. And my job today in this webinar presentation is to talk to you about a number of aspects to do with the journal Lithosphere, but also to talk about open access publishing and how you can use open access publishing to advance your career. So let's get into it. Let's get started. Let's get going. Thank you once again for sharing information. Do not be shy. At any point throughout our event today, you can type comments, you can give us feedback, you can give us information about yourself, of course, in the webinar chat box. Lithosphere, open access publishing, advancing open research across the geosciences. You're probably asking, what are we going to be talking about in this webinar today? Well, we are going to be talking about 4 related aspects in the 4 sections of our fantastic event this morning, this evening, this afternoon, depending upon your time zone. First of all, we're going to talk about Lithosphere, the journal, and a little bit about Geoscience World so that you know what it's all about and what Geoscience World does and what the journal Lithosphere is all about. We're then going to talk about why you should choose Lithosphere as a great option for publishing your next paper. We're going to talk a little bit about journal selection and the different kinds of journals that are available, that are out there, and why open access publishing in a journal like Lithosphere is a great option for geoscientists to advance their careers and spread the message, spread the research, get the research out there and disseminated. I'm also then going to give you a number of quick tips for writing a paper that will help your citation rate to increase. And this is based on our experience working with Lithosphere, working with geologists all over the world. What kinds of elements go into a highly cited, highly read, highly downloaded article? And then once your paper's published, of course, hopefully in Lithosphere, as we'll be talking about in our event today, we're then going to give you some suggestions to help you promote your article. What should happen to your article? What can you do with your article post-publication to make sure that it does have the highest possible chance of making an impact? And that's what it's all about at the end of the day, writing a paper that other colleagues around the world are going to read. We don't write papers just to stick them on the wall. We write them so that other colleagues, other geologists, other geoscientists, other natural and physical scientists around the world will cite them and use them in their own work in the future. So those are the 4 sections of our presentation today. As I mentioned already, please do not be shy. Please do not hesitate to put any questions or any comments or any feedback, indeed, into the webinar chat or into the Q&A. Let's get going. Let's talk a little bit about the journal Lithosphere. If you haven't heard about the journal Lithosphere before, now's your chance. We're going to give you a comprehensive rundown, starting with a few key facts about this fantastic journal. Well, Lithosphere is gold open access. We'll talk about that in a moment again, but gold open access means that all of the content, all of the time, all of the papers published in this journal are free online for anyone to access. Gold open access. It's a community-driven journal published by Geoscience World, and we'll talk about Geoscience World, the entity, in a moment. And of course, fully compliant with all funder mandates. So if you get research funding, it's totally okay to publish your work in Lithosphere. It covers research in all areas of Earth, planetary and environmental sciences, a broad open access mega journal, as we like to call them in the publishing industry. Lots of content, lots of information, open access, free online for everybody. And what's really cool and what's really important about the journal Lithosphere is that it's supported by seven prestigious societies in the geosciences. And what you get is swift and comprehensive submission and decision-making, which is unique. And we'll talk about that again in a moment as well, because this journal, open access, gold open access, has a global editorial board and a global readership. Very, very important and very interesting for you if you are a geoscientist thinking of a good place to put your next paper. Here's a few stats. We all love those numbers. This is the leading open access journal in the geosciences. And don't just take my word for it. You can see it on the screen. A great impact factor, 2.4, expanding, enhancing over a 5-year period to up to 3. And you've got the other pieces of information about the journal there. So you really couldn't ask for a better journal, open access journal to pick for your next paper. This is the leading open access journal in the geosciences. And here are those society partners that we talked about before, listed on this slide. I won't read them all out because some of them I can barely pronounce, but nevertheless, these are the society partners backing the journal Lithosphere, partners in Geoscience World, as we'll talk about again in a moment. But you may be a member of one of these societies. If you're a geoscientist, and I expect that almost everybody attending this event today will be a geologist or geoscientist of some ilk, you will nevertheless have heard of these societies. They are backing the journal, they are supporting the journal, they are behind the journal in this publishing project, in this gold open access publishing project, the Lithosphere Society Partners. So here is a bit more information about all of those subject areas, pretty comprehensive, as we talked about a little bit earlier, across the geosciences. Almost all of those subject areas, geoscience subject areas, of course, applied geophysics, atmospheric science, economic geology, mineralogy, crystallography, oceanography, petroleum geology, paleontology, my favorite subject, alongside paleoclimate and sedimentary geology. So if you've got a research project that's coming to an end, or a research project that needs a home, you're looking for a journal potentially to target with that next paper, you'd like the paper to be open access, you'd like the paper to be published relatively quickly with some great editorial feedback, which we'll come on to in a moment, then this could very well be the journal for you, covering lots of subject areas, a broad scope within the geosciences. And we also want to emphasize the values of the journal. Lithosphere is community-driven, trusted, as we've already talked about. It's backed by prominent organizations, 7 geological societies, with a proven track record in publishing quality, authoritative research. And this is also a not-for-profit operation. Okay, so unlike many of those big commercial publishers, this is not about the money. What's happening here is that this organization, Geoscience World, through the journal Lithosphere, is reinvesting the money that they make through APCs and other publication charges back into the geoscience community. And this supports the mission of all of those participating societies that we looked at before. So community-driven, not-for-profit, and trusted as an outlet for high-quality publications. Purposely, Lithosphere was developed by the community working through Geoscience World to meet the needs of the geoscience community. So shaped by scientists, and the papers being published in this journal are by your peers, by other geoscientists, by other researchers in your subject area. And what this also means is that you've got a sustainable hub, a sustainable place that you can go to access other collaborators in your subject area. It's an opportunity, in effect, for community collective advancement. And of course, as I already mentioned, all of the incoming article processing charge revenue, we'll talk about what that means again in a moment, goes back into the work of those partner societies. So a very value-driven, very community-focused operation. Lithosphere as an open access journal. So covering all disciplines, broad coverage of research, diverse international editorial board and reviewer base with expertise across the geosciences. And the research is gold open access. So it's open for anyone to read. And this, of course, enhances citations, scientific sharing, and collaboration. Indexed, of course, in our friends at the Directory of Open Access Journals, as well as in EBSCOhost, GeoRef, Science Citation Index, Scopus, that's where the impact factor comes from, archived in LOCKSS. So we have a journal opportunity here for you, fully compliant with all funder requirements for open access. So if you're in the US, for example, you've gotten federal funding, that funding might very well say you've got to publish your research in a gold open access journal. Well, this Lithosphere could very well be the journal for you. And based on your institutional affiliation, society memberships, lots of discounts, lots of APC waivers are available. More about the values of this journal. Free for readers to access, read and cite, fulfilling all of those OA mandates, backed by those 7 leading scientific societies, as we've talked about already. Very cooperative, very constructive peer review process. What's great about open access publishing is that you get to retain, you get to keep the copyright of your work, which is a big difference between open access publishing and publishing in a paywalled subscription journal. Very often those publishers take the copyright. So that's also something that's very well worth keeping in mind. And we also encourage data deposition. So the data that underlies your research can be shared, can be looked at, can be worked on by others. So lots of author benefits, not least of which the speed of publication and the great impact factor, 2.4, rising to 3 over that 5-year impact factor window. And the editorial board, by the way, is built from participating society nominations, spanning 17 countries, reflecting the journal's global footprint. And under the journal's distributed editorship model, each section editor oversees one of the many geoscience disciplines covered by the journal's expansive scope, as we've seen on previous slides. And what happens is that the associate editors in your subject area, let's say it's paleoclimate or paleontology or geophysics or structural geology, they will run the peer review in their area of expertise. So your paper gets looked at by subject area experts in your field. It's not going to get handled by a general editor that's not sure about the content of your paper, that's not sure about whether your paper is interesting and important or not. And of course, those editorial advisors will help with content strategy. So definitely the broad depth of geosciences represented throughout the editorial review process. You've got the chance to get your paper looked at by experts when you make that initial submission. And what happens at Lithosphere is that we strive for a great researcher experience, reducing the amount of time articles spent in peer review. That's about 3 months, which is pretty good across the whole of the publishing spectrum. Let me tell you, peer review is collaborative. You're working in partnership with those editorial board members, subject area specialists, as we talked about already, within that editorial board, and your paper gets assigned to the right person, which means that peer review at Lithosphere is very positive, and the feedback that comes in from authors reflects that. Feedback gives the impression, shows that the peer review process is as positive as possible, because the goal here is to build those long-term relationships with authors, keep people coming back, make sure that authorship is a positive experience, feedback is always good, and of course, using a single blind peer review process, which means that you don't know who the reviewers are, but they know who you are. So that's the basis for the process. That's the basis for what happens in terms of handling peer review. But importantly, it's collaborative. So your paper is assigned to a subject area specialist. That specialist then manages peer review. So you can be confident that experts in your field will be evaluating your work. So, thinking about whether to submit a paper to Lithosphere? I bet you are. Well, have a look at this quick checklist. You can critically self-evaluate whether your paper has the right scope, it's novel, is it original within known contexts? How good are your methods, the study design, data analysis, etc.? Have you minimized bias to maximize your study's validity and reliability? What are the real-world implications, the applications, the influence, and over what time scale? And of course, is your work ethically compliant? And is your writing readable and suitable for non-specialist readers? And by the way, we're here to help with that. So do get in touch if you're thinking about writing a paper and you need help with the language. That's what we do. Get in touch with the team at Lithosphere. The editorial team will be able to help you get your paper in the best possible shape for submission. As you self-evaluate and start to think, I've got some research, would it be suitable for submission to Lithosphere? Here's a checklist that you can have a look at to have a think about whether your work is going to make it, going to be up to par to get into this particular journal. So we're on to section 2. I hope that you're staying with me so far. We've talked about the journal. What do we know? What is the background? What's the scope, the aims, the peer review process, the basis for the editorial board at Lithosphere? So now let's talk a little bit about why you might wish to choose Lithosphere as a journal for your next article. We'll talk about journal selection, and we'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of journals that are out there that you could be selecting from. What about journal selection? Well, this involves finding the best possible journal for your next paper. And this is important because effective journal selection speeds up your article publication. Matching your paper to a good journal means that your paper has a higher chance of publication. This maximizes your article's impact. And also, we're here to help you detect and avoid any fake journals, which can be a big problem for many researchers around the world, not sure about those emails that are coming in from all of those different journals. So, picking an effective journal for your next paper is very important because this ensures that your research stands out. Many papers get published every year, about 2 million per year, 30,000 approximately in the geosciences, physical sciences, natural sciences. Each month, you need to make sure that your paper stands out from all of the others. And one good way to do that, of course, is potentially selecting a journal that everybody can access that has a decent impact factor. A journal like Lithosphere, 2.4 rising to 3. It's a journal that will ensure that your research gets seen by a large amount of people in your field. So why do this before starting to write? We always recommend that it's a great idea to have a journal in mind before you begin the writing process, because that helps you with the structure. That helps you understand what goes into the different sections of your article, how much text to put into the introduction, the methods, the results, the discussion, what goes where in the different parts of the paper. Very common questions that researchers ask us all of the time can be dealt with if you pick a journal at the start of the process. Reasons to do this can also include that you can learn about that journal's aims and scope, their readership, disciplines and topics, the types of articles that they publish, and you'll know their guidelines. Perhaps you're not so keen on double-blind peer review. Perhaps you prefer single-blind peer review, the formatting, the word limits, the copyrights. What kind of English are you expected to use? All of these questions and more can be addressed easily if you have a journal in mind before you begin that writing process. So I would recommend this. People often ask about ways to accelerate the writing and publishing process. Well, picking a journal early is an important step in that process, because this is an effective marriage, really, between your research and your publication. So things to look out for, and we talk to researchers all of the time, things to look out for when selecting a journal: its impact factor, its reach within the field, its reputation, and whether or not it's open access, the accessibility of that journal to the community. So with Lithosphere, you have all of these different components. You've got an impact factor. It's got reputation and reach within the field. It's well respected. It's supported by those 7 societies that we talked about before. And of course, it's also open access. So it fits all 4 of those things that researchers often talk about, often ask about, are often interested in when selecting a journal. So Lithosphere could be a good choice for you. And let me just quickly talk a little bit more about what it means to be gold open access. A gold open access journal, as we've talked about a little bit earlier on in this event, is a journal that's fully open access. So all of the content being published in Lithosphere is immediately available online for anyone to access and read. This is gold open access, as opposed to what we call green open access. That's where you might get a paper accepted in a traditional firewalled, subscription blocked journal that only certain universities, let's say, have a subscription to. Let's say you get your paper accepted there. You may very well be allowed, depending on the embargo periods of those publications, to put an earlier draft, the final submitted version, not the published version, the final submitted version, onto your website or onto a site like ResearchGate, for example. Very common, academia.edu, places like that. This is green open access, where you're providing access to the content, providing access to the research, but not the final published version of the research. And this is an important distinction because different funding agencies have different requirements, and some may say that they want you to only publish in a gold open access journal. So this is worth keeping in mind. This is worth thinking about when selecting a journal and having a look at your funding requirements and the mandates that have come back from your funding agency. I would also say that it's very important as well to think about why you want to get your paper published. Do you want to get published to get more funding? Do you want to get published to get promoted? Many people want to move up that academic ladder, or to develop research and development, or it may be the case that you need to get published to get your PhD, to get your master's, for example. And that may necessitate, depending upon your country of residence, a publication in a Scopus listed journal with an impact factor that may or may not be gold open access. So in that respect as well, often Lithosphere is a good choice for an effective, quickly, single-blind, peer-reviewed publication in an outlet that's going to potentially advance your career. So also worth having a think about this. So we've talked so far in our event today about Lithosphere, about the journal. We've also talked briefly about why it might be a good idea to have a think about choosing Lithosphere for your next submission, the different kinds of journals, and why a gold open access journal fits with all of those 4 criteria that researchers often think about when selecting a journal. Let's now talk a little bit about how you can effectively write that paper. Quick tips for writing a paper that will be highly cited based on our experience working with authors around the world. So here's a cycle, here's a wheel, 12 tips for boosting your citations. Around the wheel we go. Choose your keywords carefully. Use the same name on all your papers. Getting an ORCID ID is a very good idea. Disseminate and promote your research. We're going to talk about that in the final part of our session together today. Cite your previously published papers within reason. Publish in journals read by others in your field. The whole point of our presentation today. Try to publish in OA journals if you can. Write those review papers. Lithosphere is a place where you can go also to editors and talk about that opportunity. Submitting to special issues. Again, have a look at what's going on, what's available, your different societies in the geosciences, what they're doing in terms of special issues. Be collaborative. I would say very good tip for getting lots of papers published. I've published more than 300 or so, and lots of work with other people. Lots of collaboration enables that publication success. Going for journals with higher impact factors, of course, a comprehensive reference list, and as we're going to talk about in a moment, being smart, enticing, alluring, getting people interested in your work with a fantastic title. These are tips that people follow. Published work shows that these aspects of the publication journey can help you to enhance your citation rate. So, your accessibility. Can other users access the content? That's gold open access. Dissemination. Does your journal publicize your paper after publication? Well, the Lithosphere team work hard in order to do just that, to promote the work after publication, to work on the marketing, dissemination of the study so that other people will see it, read it, and cite it. And what about academic authority? Do readers of the journal perceive expertise? Well, yes, they do in this case, because there are many geological societies supporting this publication. Key considerations for writing and publishing a highly cited paper. So what you want to do is go in and try to solve practical, real research problems. Thinking big with your data over 10 years rather than just over 1 year. What about publishing with other researchers who contribute to and complement your knowledge and perspective? And using a simple writing style. We talk about this all of the time in our other workshops, how to write and communicate effectively in English. So if you're enjoying this one, do get in touch with the team. We'd be delighted to come back for more of these in the future. Talk about your work, of course. Promote your research and always adhering to ethical principles in the end of the day. So tips for writing a highly cited research paper. Ideas for you when you sit down, when you start to develop that next research project, the kinds of ways in which you can ensure that your work has the highest possible chance of success in your field. Journal selection, of course, is key, as we've talked about already, ensuring your audience is engaged. And what do you get from a journal that's supported by many societies within a particular field? You get lots of audience researcher engagement. This is a key journal in the geosciences. It's a route to maximize your readership as tips for boosting citations, putting together effective articles that other researchers are going to read, other researchers are going to want to use and going to want to cite. And I would say, if you forget everything else that I talk about in this presentation today, please remember the message here on this slide. Before you begin to write your next academic article, before you start to hammer away at the keyboard, putting pen to paper, please do have a think about these three things. The three things that you should know about, have in mind, be ready to talk about before you begin the writing process. Your message. What is the takeaway, the key takeaway, the key thing that you want readers to get out of reading your paper? The message. Who are the audience? Well, that's the journal. That's the target journal. That could be Lithosphere. The audience and the structure of the writing. That comes from the target journal, of course. Each journal is different shape to the different sections. But your message, your audience and structure really are key elements to have in mind before you begin the writing process. And of course, you've already got a mentorship group. If you haven't thought about it that way, have a think about it that way now. You know people in your subject area from around the world working in the same area as you. These are your peers. They are potential people who could be peer reviewing your next paper. So you need to make sure that people in your network are aware of you and are aware of your research so that they can be utilized, if necessary, to provide peer reviews of your study. So things to know before you start to write: your message, your audience and structure, and building that effective mentorship group around you so that you have suggestions for peer reviewers. And we build out the message, the structure of a paper by thinking about guiding our readers. What's your research question? What are your aims? And what is the conclusion? Are key initial questions to ask yourself at the beginning of the writing and publishing process. What's your question? Why is it important? Are you looking at something unknown, a limitation, a controversy? What are the aims of your work? What do you plan to achieve? And how is this directly related to a specific problem? And what is your conclusion? How does it advance the field? What does it answer? What's key? What's important? What's the takeaway from this particular piece of research? That message. You can think about the structure, you can think about the audience with the target journal in mind. But that initial piece, that initial idea, the message of the paper is absolutely critical at the outset, because what we want to know as readers, as editors, and as peer reviewers might be quite different to what you end up putting down on paper because you're so close to the research. You may be writing down what you think is easily understandable, but it might not be to your readers, to your editors and peer reviewers. What's the variable? Where's the outcome? And what's the sample? Potentially are important things to go into an effective title for your next academic article. And what you really want as an effective title is something that is what we call non-declarative. So something that entices the reader, attracts them, gets them interested in the study, gets them thinking, I would like to learn more about that research, rather than telling them the answer in the title. That's called a declarative title, and it's often something to avoid in academic publishing because, of course, you want your readers to read on. You want them to read more than just the title. An effective title, then, should contain the fewest possible words to adequately describe the contents of the paper. Keep it short. Identify the main issue. Begin with the subject. Accurate, unambiguous, specific, and complete. No infrequently used abbreviations, and above all, attract your readers. Did you know that titles less than 7 words in length actually tend to get more citations. It's a fact. Keep it short, keep it succinct, attract your readers, allure them, get them thinking. I would like to read more about that study. I'd like to learn the answer to this study, to the question that this study addresses. I'm interested in learning more. So your title should be compelling, concise, and informative. Get the most important words in there related to the topic, enticing your readers without giving away the punchline, not over-sensationalized, as we often see in my field, paleontology. Magnificent, gigantic, amazing, fantastic. These are not appropriate words in your academic writing. It should be compelling. Get the most important words in there, attract and entice your readers into wanting to read more. And we've got some recent examples from papers here published in Lithosphere that give you some ideas. At the top, a non-declarative title, The Effect of Cyclic Thermal Shock on Granite Pore Permeability, How to Seal Hydraulic Fracturing Boreholes, Non-rigid bookshelf kinematics, constraints. They're non-declarative. They don't tell the reader what the actual outcome of the study is. They are there to get you thinking, I would like to learn more. I would like to know more about that particular study. And there's a question-based title there at the bottom as well. Lots of people use these as well. These are called interrogative titles, question-based titles, How to Resolve Strike Slip Behavior on the Tibetan Plateau. A reader of that title might think, well, I'm interested in learning the answer to that. I'm going to read on. So your title is a window onto your study. It's important as something to get people interested in the study and wanting to learn more. And your abstract too is really important, highly important, almost critical to initially get your editor and potentially those peer reviewers as well interested in learning more about the study. A good quality abstract is honest and precise, can stand alone, no technical jargon, short and specific, and the quality of this piece of writing, you've got 200, 250, 300 words to talk about everything that your study did, is important because it will inform your editor's decision. And what happens, and I've seen this a lot with graduate students working with me, sadly, many authors write the abstract of their study in a rush, almost as an afterthought. This needs to be a concise, standalone piece of writing with a very clear message, accurately reflecting the full text of the paper. You can write easily an effective abstract for your next paper by writing down these 4 questions on the slide and answering them in sequence with the results of your next study. It's called the 4-question-based technique. Why did you do the study? What did you do? What did you find? And what did you conclude? Why did you do it? What did you do? That's the methods. What did you find? That's the results. And what did you conclude? A structure to your writing. Readers expect that structure when they read your paper, and editors will also have to have that in sequence in order to understand what you are talking about. A structured abstract, even if your journal does not expect that, it's important to nevertheless create that structure from your abstract at the outset because it helps you to organize your ideas. And here we've got the background initially. And have a look at these slides later. Have a look at this presentation later when we give you access to the link to the recording of this event, to the slides of this event, because we've put some examples into this section that we hope will help you to write an effective, structured abstract. Here is the methodology, the principal findings, that central core component of the abstract, the what did you do and why did you do it section. And here comes the last part, the conclusions and significance. So what did you do? Why did you do it? What did you find? And what are the conclusions? What's the outcome? What's the take-home message? Remember the message of your study, to have that in mind before you begin at the outset. A structure, an effective, accurate, alluring, attractive, enticing title that's short and simple and gets people interested in learning more about the study, and a structured, effective abstract that contains the key elements of your work in sequence so that people know what's happening in the study. So have a look at recent papers published in Lithosphere. Have a look at how the abstracts are structured. You can go in with a marker pen. You can answer my 4 questions with content from the abstract. You can convince yourself that these questions are answered in sequence in the study. So have a look at that. Do convince yourself that these 4 component questions of an effective abstract do need to be there in sequence in that block of text that advertises your paper and talks about the contents of your study at the beginning and at the top, because effective abstracts are key. Remember, your readers. These are the most important people in academic publishing. After all, of course, are readers. They don't have time to read everything published in their field. People read abstracts every day to stay up to date. And of course, your abstract is often the only thing that gets read by other researchers. So it's got to be effective. It's got to get out the message of your study. It's got to convince people that your study is important. Why did you do it? What did you do? What did you find? And how does your research advance the field? Key questions to answer when putting your paper together, when putting your abstract together at the outset. And now, finally, having talked about Lithosphere the journal, having talked about why you should choose Lithosphere the journal and open access publishing in general, as well as some quick tips, and we've got lots more where that came from. If you'd like to learn more, do get in touch after the webinar. Now let's talk quickly about how you can promote your article post-publication, because of course there are several different kinds of impact that we talk about as researchers, talking about maximizing not just the academic components of impact, the great journal like Lithosphere with the high impact factor, the many citations, the great promotion after publication, but also the economic and societal benefits of your work as well. Funding agencies are interested in this. Universities, governments, you need to be able to show that your work is also making a difference to the people around you. So impact, of course, again, depends upon readers. They've got no spare time to read. They want to read papers as fast as possible. They're going to get frustrated if they struggle with understanding most articles that they read. And you can ask yourself this question if you don't believe me. Most articles will not be essential reading. So applying simple writing techniques to keep your English simple and easy to follow, because most of your readers will not be native English speakers. And this is something that people very often forget in academic English writing. Most of the work being done around the world is being done by non-native speakers. Most of your readers will also not be native English speakers. So keeping the writing simple and effective is key to your success, as we've talked about in this training event today. And when you do get published, take some time to celebrate that, promote that, work with the team at Geoscience World to make sure that your paper has the highest possible chance of impact. Talk about it at international conferences, at those society conferences, those 7 societies that support Geoscience World and support the journal Lithosphere. Get involved in social media, tag Lithosphere, tag Geoscience World, tag your society, and do in turn get involved in press releases and talking to the media, because don't make the mistakes that I used to make as a researcher, doing absolutely nothing after your papers get published. It's important to promote your work, get it out there and get it talked about, and make sure you are hooked into the main ways that people follow literature. Of course, you should have an ORCID ID. That's how we differentiate researchers from one another in the submission process and citation process. You're on Google Scholar, you're using Web of Science, you're using Scopus to track and understand where your papers come from. Because in these training events, we are here to provide a roadmap to successful writing and publishing. As we talk about preparation, we talk about selling yourself to journals. We talk about structuring the writing, as we have done a little bit today, and also about effective English writing to make sure that you follow simple rules. Makes a huge difference, ensures that your paper has the best possible chance of eventual acceptance in a great journal like Lithosphere. So in summary, today in our event, we have talked about Lithosphere. why it's great, who runs it, and how the journal works. We've talked about why you might wish to choose a gold open access journal like Lithosphere for your next article submission, and why that's an important and potentially great thing for your career, marrying the things that researchers like about journals with the journal Lithosphere. We've then also gone on to talk about some quick tips, giving you some tricks, some tips, some hints for writing a paper that will be highly cited. That wheel of 12 tips, a title, an effective abstract, and then finally, just now, some suggestions for research article promotion post publication. So I would like to thank you for listening to this event. We're going to have time for questions in just a moment, but I would also say that communication, effective communication, is absolutely critical if you are to maximize your success as a writing and publishing research academic. Journal selection, writing skills, editor communication, managing the peer review process, getting your paper accepted, and managing its promotion post-publication. So, of course, any questions or any issues, do just ask, or indeed send a quick email to Ruth King, who's the managing editor of Lithosphere. And her email is here on the slide in front of you. And with that, I will say thank you very much for listening to this. Thank you very much for being here. If you do have questions, please do put them into either the webinar chat or into the Q&A box. And as Jessica is writing in the chat, all registrants will receive a recording of this presentation after the session, of course, also access to the slides, also access to a certificate. Arindam, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, is asking, does the journal have discounts for developing countries? Well, maybe Ruth can answer that. You can drop her an email at the email address here on the screen. That would be a great thing to do after this event. Arindam, do that. Maybe also Jessica, if she's available and listening, could write a quick reply into the chat box. Does the journal have discounts for developing countries? Also, an anonymous attendee is asking, can review articles be published in Lithosphere? Again, I would say if you have specific questions like that, then please do drop an email to Ruth King, the managing editor of Lithosphere at Geoscience World. Her email is there on the screen, editorial@geoscienceworld.com. And we have a question about the use of ChatGPT, which I'll answer in a moment. Jessica says, yes, we provide significant discounts for authors from developing countries. That's fantastic news. Great to hear. So Arindam, you have an answer to your question. Now all you've got to do is check that your research is a good fit for Lithosphere. If you have questions about that, then of course you can write to Ruth. Her email address is there on the screen. A colleague is asking, is it recommended to use GPT to revise a paper draft? I am not at the moment familiar with the guidelines that Geoscience World have on the use of ChatGPT and other AI tools in writing, polishing, and editing papers. But I think that it's the case with most publishers that if you're using those kinds of tools to revise or edit your draft, you should talk to the editor. You should drop Ruth an email, ask about that particular specific issue, be very open, be very explicit, say in your cover letter, acknowledge that you have done this in your article, editing, rephrasing, paraphrasing, spell checking. If you're going to use AI tools, you must tell the journal about that at least. And the journal will then be able to come back to you and say that's appropriate or that's not appropriate. So do be open about that, absolutely. Pritam is saying there are 4 journals from GSA, GSW, Geosphere, and GSA Bulletin don't charge any APCs, but Lithosphere do. How can we convince the higher authority for APC when they will argue for publishing in Bulletin of the GSA and Geosphere, which has a higher impact factor? Great point, Pritam. Absolutely great point. On the use of AI tools, Jessica is saying, Ruth is happy to discuss in more depth, but definitely we require disclosure of the use of any AI tools. That's what I was just saying. On your point, Pritam, that's a great question. do write to Ruth about that, because I imagine that I know that the major advantage of Lithosphere is that it's a gold open access journal. So do get in touch. I would send that direct question to Ruth, drop that into an email to editorial@geoscienceworld.org, and she'll be, I'm sure, more than happy to come back with a comment with questions. All right, any further questions, any further comments? We have a little bit of time left in our event today. If anyone else would like to ask a question, of course, you can get in touch with me as well. Gareth Dyke is my name. You'll find me on LinkedIn. You can talk to the team at Geoscience World, to Jessica Lawrence Hurt, who's been writing in the chat box, Ruth King, the managing editor at editorial@geoscienceworld.org. I think that we have reached the end of our questions, unless anyone else has a question or a comment that they'd like to drop quickly into the chat box or into the Q&A. With that, I will say thank you so much, everybody, for the opportunity to do this. Thank you so much for the time today, this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you in our next event. We'll see you in our next webinar. Thank you so much, and best wishes to everybody, and talk to you very, very soon. Have a great day, best wishes, and thanks for joining our event today.